Hello, Pod Smashers of the Internet, and welcome to another episode of
HE Bitch Podsmash,
Where Gaming Goes to Grab a Beer. We are your hosts,
Penguin and Termite. I'm Penguin.
and I am Termite, and we are a weekly video game podcast smashing together topics that you care about with video games.
That's right, and tonight we're going to be talking about the long-term storytelling, or how do franchises maintain a narrative over a long period of time.
Ooh,
it's kind of,
they don't.
It's kind of another one in our little storytelling. They don't. Spoilers. Cool. All right, well, we are Where Gaming Goes to Grab a Beer, so what are we drinking tonight?
Again, we are drinking Buffalo Trace because Penguin Man's on a keto diet.
Yeah, I just realized that we had already talked about that.
So you've lost like 15 pounds now?
10 pounds, actually.
Oh,
Yeah, not as much as last time so far.
Really?
But I've been on it less than last time, so that's that.
Do you think about food a lot?
So my wife explains it really well because she's doing it with me this time. She says, I don't hate what I'm eating, if that makes sense. A lot of times dieting is defined by I'm really choking these salads down, but I hate salads.
Mm-hmm.
I love what I eat, but I do still miss what I don't get to eat.
Right. You hate restricting yourself.
Yeah, I miss...
You feel deprived.
Right now, and I
something.
may have to cheat because right now... Not right now, but before it's the limited time on this item is up, I may have to cheat because they have a Carolina Reaper ranch sauce at Taco Bell right now that they're putting on. They're putting on a burrito, a nacho fry burrito, or you can get it with steak and nacho fries.
I have had neither of that.
And
that sounds amazing.
I love spicy food, and Taco Bell has been known to be, they've been experimenting with spicier foods lately, which makes me think they going for Carolina Reaper is a big step. So it may just be pomp and circumstance, but I have to know for myself. I have to know if it's really spicy. I need to know how spicy this burrito is. So it's a pathological need for me, and I'm willing to accept that I'm a broken person and
it's
have
a
weird
limited
needs.
time only.
Exactly.
You have to go get it.
So I do. So depending on how limited time, I was trying to Google how limited time is this burrito, and all it says is it's for a limited time. I'm like, nah. So I might have to, depending on how desperate I get, I might have to cheat. But.
And Krispy Kreme has cake batter filled original donuts.
No, I don't need to know these.
For this week only. To celebrate the 50th anniversary of the moon landing, Apollo 11. Cake batter filled original donuts. Yeah. The original ones, the glazed.
That's the hard part. Stuff like that.
Yeah.
Missing out on stuff like that when it's fun to do so. So it's fine though.
Limited release beer.
But I'm enjoying this Buffalo Trace. So.
Buffalo Trace is good. How many carbs is this?
3.
Nice.
Most whiskeys and bourbons are 2 to 3 carbs because the sugar has already been processed.
Yep.
It's
a light news night.
That's what alcohol is.
That's why we're talking about this.
Alcohol is yeast poop. It is the light news night. Yeah, normally
if you want to listen to more of us about poop, you can go back to our episode 1 where we talk about standing or sitting.
Yeah. No, there's not really much news tonight, so we're allowing ourselves to talk a little bit. But so normally we fill this space with news and happenings in the video game industry, but since we don't really have a lot happening right now, what's new with you? Yeah.
Well, I'm adopting to life with a newborn, so I've been playing a lot of Skyrim, which is fun. So we have show notes up on Evernote usually, and we have them up on a laptop screen here. We do this every week. This is how we do our thing. Evernote just crashed, and there's a giant warning sign that says the Evernote service is temporarily unavailable.
So give us a moment to pull up our phones.
Let's see if we can get there through our cell phones. And it is. There it is.
Thanks, Evernote.
Yep. So that's cool. Now we have our cell phones.
Love it when software
Love
fails
technology
you.
in 2019, guys.
Cool. Well, why don't we go ahead and get an early start to doing this podcast is our favorite thing. Doing this podcast is our favorite thing. Favorite things. All right. Favorite things is a segment of our podcast where we like to take a little bit of time to update you with the thing that we're interested in this week, the thing we're excited about, and our favorite things, so that in hopes you might find your next favorite thing.
It can be as deep as an emotional connection with your child, or as shallow as I like my toothbrush.
Good toothbrushes.
However you want.
Cool. I'll go first.
Go for it.
So
Lay it on me.
Work does these quarterly celebrations, and they are what they sound like. They're just times for the company to get together after we've reached certain company goals and celebrate. So we had our Q2 celebration this week. And today, actually.
Is this when you went to Circuit Bar? Is that one of those?
that was last year.
Sorry.
That was, they restructured them recently around the quarters. Okay. As opposed to,
they used to just be
randomly. So we went bowling, at a place called River City Roll in Richmond.
Okay.
And so when I first heard it, I was like, oh, bowling, whatever. You know, I've been bowling before. I wasn't thinking about it. But I just out of curiosity, because I missed the last quarterly celebration. I was at like a really bougie shuffleboard place.
Ooh.
And I was like, oh, well, let's see what the River City Roll thing is. So I go and I look on their website. I can tell immediately, especially based on, I just look at the menu and like what beers and stuff they have available. They're also their drink menu. And I'm like, oh my gosh, they're offering like super bougie cocktails. Ooh. Their food is super hipster bougie. And I'm like, this is not what I think of when I think of a bowling alley. I think of like, you know, the floor is kind of covered in like a layer of like sticky Bud Light and it's like an 80s carpet and there's like 40 lanes.
And you get wings and Bud Light.
Yeah, exactly. Or nachos. I think nachos. I'm thinking like cheap, like microwave
cardboard
from frozen.
pizza.
Yeah, exactly. Microwave from frozen food. But no, this place is like a legit restaurant, bar, and bowling alley. And the bowling is super nice. So I go and it's awesome. I will say I cheated a little bit on my diet because they had wings. I'm like, sweet wings, I can eat wings. But then everyone goes over and there's like this line of like all these pizzas.
Oh yeah.
And I'm just like, my mouth is watering because they look so good. And I'm like, you know what? I'll just have one slice. I ended up having like 5 slices.
You really cheated.
Really. That's okay. I'm going to fast tomorrow, get myself back into ketosis. It'll be fine. It'll be fine. I won't pass out in the middle of my work day.
Would you have done that if it wasn't free?
No, absolutely not.
Because it was there.
If it was like, if I could have bought whatever I wanted, I would have actually had some keto, it wasn't specifically keto offering, but they had like pork rinds. And I was like, oh, sweet. Like, I want to see what these were. But no, because it was free.
Buffet style.
Someone already, it was there and it was free. And I was like, oh, man. So I didn't go too crazy. They had really good beers there. They had both. They had the Christmas morning and the Kentucky Christmas morning from Hardywood, gingerbread stouts. I was like, what, in July? Yeah, I was so excited. But I was like, no, I'm going to be good. And so I just had some Maker's Mark instead. And
but you had 5 slices of pizza.
Drinking Maker's Mark. Yeah. Well, okay, listen. The Maker's Mark decision came first, and then I gave up and got pizza.
I blame Maker's Mark for your poor decision.
Yeah, sure, that's fine. Yeah. I'll accept that. Anyways, it was a really fun time. It, like, hindsight, I'm like, that would be a really cool place to go. Maybe not when I'm on a diet, and, like, on a double date when we're willing to spend a little bit of money, because it was a little pricey. Again, work paid for it all, so I didn't care, but it was a really cool place. Again, it's built in, like, it's like, there's a brewery attached, you know, it's total Richmond hipster experience, but kind of cool. So, yeah.
Sweet.
That was my River City Roll. Check it out if you're a Richmond local.
I bet it's expensive if you don't have your company paying for it.
Yeah, well, you know. Thanks, Proxians.
So, my favorite thing is an old friend of mine, a coworker from Starbucks days. His name is David. Shout out to you, David, if you listen to us. I know you do, because you told me you did. I am immensely grateful at the amount of stuff he gave me. And this is all video game related. He dropped off 5 boxes of video game stuff. And the reason why he did this is, he's a generous person because this stuff is amazing. He knows I have a collection of old school video games. We're sitting in that room right now as we record, and I have consoles stemming from, I guess my oldest one is a Nintendo, and through the modern consoles, and I have bookshelves of games, handhelds galore, everything you can think of that is not super rare or expensive. I have something in that collection. So he drops off boxes and he pulls up and he pulls out a box of games. Here you go. And we walk into my house and I look in the box and I see a Sega Saturn. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I've never had a Saturn before. Thank you so much. And then a second box. There's 3 Xbox 360s, a PlayStation 3. It keeps going. Another box. 2 PlayStation 1s, a PS2. Another box, 4 NES consoles.
Wow.
Another box, just 2 or 3 more boxes loaded with games for all the systems. Mm-hmm. And he was like, here, I wanted to contribute to the fun.
Wow.
I am absolutely amazed and immensely grateful. And I have spent hours upon hours cleaning and restoring and refurbishing these things, hooking up stuff, testing them, make sure they work, adding them to my collection. And I just cannot wait to get into actually playing all this stuff.
If you have time. When will you have time?
I know. If I can get away from trophies.
Yeah. And your son. Maybe taking care of your son.
Well, I meant like within the realm of my...
Yeah, I gotcha.
So anyway, that's my favorite thing. I have a TurboGrafx Turbo Duo, which is a combination console of their card reading console and CD. It's immensely expensive on the internet. They're super hard to find. They came out at the end of the TurboGrafx 16 consoles life cycle. They were super expensive at the time, and it flopped. So I now have a TurboGrafx, which I've never dealt with before. It came out right around the time the Super Nintendo did, in the 16-bit days, and there are games that look like they should be on modern consoles today. Even though they're 2D, the animations and the sound are amazing. And the console works. I'm so happy. So awesome. I just have so many video game retro. I'm just like on a high.
Just inundated in it. Yeah. You're going to need to take like some point when you have time off that you don't need anything for particular.
Yeah.
You just need to have like a retro game day.
Yes.
You'd be like, I'm going to take time or set aside like a weekend. Like a Saturday where you arrange it with your wife, where you just have time where you can have friends over and just have a retro game day.
Right.
You can play any game you want, but it has to be from before 2000, the year 2000.
Right. Yeah, it's like
something like that. Yeah.
Before GameCube?
Yeah.
GameCube counts. I can play GameCube.
I would say GameCube, yeah. GameCube and under. Yeah.
No Wii U, no Switch.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah.
That'd be fun. And you could what you do is you just get a room and you set it up with multiple cathode ray tube TVs.
Yeah.
And then
have more than one.
Systems come. I've got one too, so yeah, it'd be awesome.
It would be amazing.
Great.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Let's have it happen. It's gonna happen. Penguin and Termite host Retro Game Day.
Retro Game Day at Termite's house.
All right, cool. That's that segment. So let's move on to our next segment, which DLC.
You gave us like a little weird wave 80s rap horns.
Yeah, kind of like a synth.
Yeah.
DLC. All right. DLC stands for downloadable content, and it is the segment of our podcast where we just kind of have a fun little discussion about video games that you wouldn't normally have.
As if we haven't done that already tonight.
Yeah. All right. So DLC I have to do for us today is kind of linked into our main topic, but is also a regular game we play.
Ooh.
And it's Who Told Me Dat?
Who Told Me Dat?
So it's a modification of Who Did This, and it's a game we play where Termite will pick a video game character, and I will pick in this case, I will pick a common rumor. So a rumor that tends to spread, like a generic rumor.
Okay.
And you're going to tell me, you're going to pick two video game characters, and we're going to decide who told you the rumor and who the rumor was about.
Ah.
Yeah. Again, long-term storytelling is also can apply to rumors, right? It's kind of loosely hooked in.
I see. I got one video game character queued up.
All right.
And I've got, I think I've already talked about that character. Boom. Okay. One's kind of relevant to a game I'm playing, which I haven't talked about yet tonight. So, okay.
Okay. So the rumor is that someone told you that someone else had a cache of illegal substances.
Oh my gosh, this is perfect for the characters I picked.
And we'll give a bonus as to what that illegal substance may be, whether it's in universe or not.
Well, I doubt you would have guessed the universes that I'm thinking of.
That's fine, great.
We'll see.
So who told you the rumor that someone had illegal substances?
So the person leaking rumors is one of the two video game characters that I picked was Zidane, which is perfect.
Yeah.
Because he's already like...
Zidane from Final Fantasy IX,
yes,
for the record.
Exactly.
Yep.
He's already a loudmouth, like, immature boy.
Yep.
At least at the beginning of the game where I am in that right now. And so he leaked the rumor that there was a cache of illegal, I don't know what, being hidden by Tom Nook.
Yes, Tom Nook totally. He's got a whole cocaine warehouse somewhere that he's built.
You know he does. You know he does.
I don't know enough about Animal Crossing to surmise what an illegal substance.
All you need to know is when you very
world.
First start the game, you show up in a brand new village or town, and Tom Nook rents you up or loans you money to buy a house, and it is an astronomically high
a drug lord mogul.
Yeah, and he's like, sure, you can have this house, and it's like this dinky, tiny little bedroom or one room place to live, and sure, we'll give you the land to go with it. And then it's like, how much do I owe you? Oh, it's 100,000 bells, and you're like, what? One piece of fruit's worth like 10.
Wow.
And so you have to pay that off. And so you do all of your fishing and your fossil digging.
Tom Nook is basically like planting. PG Kingpin.
Yeah, totally. Oh, yeah.
Awesome. Great. Well, that's
perfect.
That was a good one. Yeah, I like that one. So that's who told me that. So it's up to you. Do you guys believe?
I thought it was Who Told Me Dis.
Well, normally it would be dis, but
Who told me
dat. I feel like that's the more proper.
Dis, dat.
What would that word type be? Preposition?
Who told me this? Who told me that?
This, that.
Doesn't
I don't
even
know
matter.
what they are.
Yeah.
You grammar nerds out there can
Probably some sort of article.
hit us up and tell us, article.
That's
I guess
what I'm
article.
guessing,
Yeah. The, this, that. Yeah. That sounds like articles to me. Good
Thanks.
call. Good pull there.
Thanks, Spanish
Man.
class.
Pew. Is that Spanish that helped you with that? Not English?
I learned more about grammar through Spanish than I ever did in any English class.
That's funny.
Taking a fraction of amount of time.
All right. Well, we'll let the listeners tell us whether they think that Tom Nook being a drug lord in Animal Crossing is a false, totally false rumor by Zidane. Because I guess the trustworthiness of the rumor spreader has to come into question.
And Zidane is not trustworthy.
I don't think he's trustworthy.
Not even a little bit.
Yeah, I guess that's the way we
Hey,
can.
do you like girls? I really like girls.
I am an asexual being that only cares about black magic.
We just went through a conversation in Final Fantasy IX. That's what that reference was.
That's funny. Cool. Well, we'll leave it up for our listeners. Tell us what you think. Do you think that Zidane's lying, or do you think Tom Nook is actually a drug lord? There's some veracity that I would believe it. I would believe it, but Zidane coming from Zidane.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I have to question that. All right, that's DLC. Oh, bow, 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 bow. We can move now on to our main topic, which, as we discussed on the intro, is we are talking about storytelling again. We haven't really hit on this specific topic, but we've hit on adjacent topics in our video game lit series that we just wrapped up. So
yes,
this
we did.
may seem a little similar to those, but we're talking about storytelling as a whole. We're talking about video games as a storytelling medium. And this time we're going to be talking about long-term storytelling. So it's going to be a little bit more loose, not quite as structured as our previous video game lit episodes.
Yeah.
And probably closer to our episode 6 or whatever, where we talked about video games as a storytelling medium. But we're specifically looking at how do these franchises...
Hey, that was 90 episodes ago.
Ah.
Is this 96? Nope,
no,
I
this
just
is
uploaded
7.
7. All right.
91
Almost.
episodes ago?
91 episodes
Yeah.
ago.
So
Sorry.
we're specifically going to be emphasizing just that we're going to be mostly talking about the duration and longevity of franchises, and really drilling into this idea, trying to answer the question: how do video games maintain narratives? How do these franchises maintain narratives when they've got 4, 5, 7, 10, 20 entries in the franchise and have
15.
to keep story up? So yeah, exactly. So I wonder where you pulled that. I wonder what that number is a reference to. Yeah. So how do they do it, and what tools they use, and is it successful? We're gonna try to answer all those questions. But let's start. Yeah. Well, I guess let's kind of lay the groundwork. What do we mean by long-term storytelling? What do we mean by that?
Long-term storytelling is when you control the story across multiple entries in a franchise.
Yeah, and
multiple generations. You keep
yeah.
going. I'm going to make a new God of War. Well, what does that mean? Well, you got to define who Kratos is. You got to define the universe that he's set in. You got to define a lot of things that you lay that out, right?
Yeah.
I want to create a new Zelda. Well, who's Link? Who's Ganon? Who's Zelda? What's their timeline? Like, where do they come from? What's canon? What's not?
Yeah. A lot of times, long-term storytelling in general, I would just say it's not a phenomenon that's unique to video games, but I will say it is, in the grand scheme of things, a pretty recent phenomenon in regards to, I would say, multiple entries in a story. So if you look at the past, most stories were told in kind of single one-offs. You know what I mean? It's just like, here, I'm going to tell this story. And though it may be told over a long period of time and may evolve over time, like most folklore, most stories, whether they're novels, plays, books, even movies, most movies before a certain time, they weren't these franchises that spanned, you weren't getting a new entry, you weren't getting a new Beowulf every, 5 years. You're just getting Beowulf retold the same story over and over again. So most storytelling, really consists of these one-off stories and one-off tales. It's a, new thing with, I would say TV was probably the biggest thing. Maybe like comics and like penny arcades and stuff like that, where, you'd have stories that were like the same character, and then that character would have multiple entries of stories told about them, and they would become a franchise, and then that character would have their story told basically, over decades possibly. And that's kind of a relatively new thing, I would say, but it's definitely been a thing in video games pretty much since they started getting popular enough to like, oh, we'll just release Mario 3 or Sonic 5 and Final Fantasy 10, and like these, the video game franchises got successful, and they realized, oh, well, we can hook more people if we sell a recognizable name So we have to come up with a story justification for why this story continues. So we're going to break that down and see how do different franchises handle that.
Yeah.
And
I want to say...
Are they good? Are they bad? We'll find out.
This started with books. I feel like books were the ones that had like a series, and you could 5 book, 10 book, 15,
trilogies,
30,
yeah,
110. Like there's like all kind of different series, right? With video games, we got, Mario was a financial success. We need to just do that again, but innovate and change some things. Come out with Mario 2, make more money, but it needs to point back to the first game enough to feel like it's within the same world. Yeah. But I think like movies did this.
Well, I think of like Sherlock Holmes. Think of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle in the 1800s was writing, like this character is successful.
That's novels, right?
It sells, it sells. I can sell more books and make more money over time. And
by staying in that world.
Yeah, by staying with this character.
Right.
Now, Sherlock Holmes is interesting because he was writing during a time when there weren't as robust intellectual property laws. So people just started taking Sherlock Holmes and writing their own stories about Sherlock Holmes. So, but still, Arthur Conan Doyle still wrote plenty of Sherlock Holmes stories. So, like, it's not a new thing in the sense that it's like, it only happened when the internet happened. Like, no, yeah. It's been happening for a long time.
But it's funny because I think movies took a while to catch up. Like, maybe Star Wars, I know Back to the Future, Lord of the Rings. I mean, even those were like 80s and early
2000s, yeah.
Like, and The Matrix was a trilogy. But I feel like if you go back to like the 70s, maybe, Terminator 1 and 2 were 80s. Rocky was 6 movies. But I feel like movies were almost kind of like...
And we have to draw the distinction. Like, we're not... sequels are a part of long-term storytelling, but even just like 2 or 3 sequels, like I can't think of a movie franchise that has as many entries as some video game franchises. Right. So like, there are very few movies that I can pull out of my hat that have the same amount of entries as like Final Fantasy, for example, is the one we've been going back to because it has that nice fancy 15 on it.
And that's like the tip of the iceberg.
I know, yeah.
Because of every offshoot that we've had, have also had sequels.
And thinking about like Modern Warfare, like Call of Duty, has just
it's annually franchised.
Yeah, and so...
But are those the same world?
The only thing I can say comes close, maybe, would be like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which is just a whole...
It's like 21 movies.
Yeah, which is a whole, like, different
Spider-Man
beast
came out,
in regards to long-term storytelling. It's a whole different beast.
Yeah.
But we'll get into all that. But that's what we mean by long-term storytelling, is just like, telling a story over multiple decades using one entry at a time, basically building out a franchise, and usually within that same world. So why is this important and relevant to video games? I think we already hit on it mostly.
Kind of. And there was one caveat I want to have, and this might train wreck another topic idea, but I feel like it's really relevant here.
Sure.
And that every new entry in a game, Devil May Cry 5 came out this year. It was one of the biggest hits of the year because January, the early side of the year was kind of dry. It's actually a February hit, right? Everyone's like, I've never played a Devil May Cry game. Can I just jump into this one? Will it work? Of course.
Yeah.
Like every single time. Kingdom Hearts 3 came out this year, January.
Yeah.
And everyone was like, can I just jump into this? Yes. Of course you can just jump into this game. Like every new entry in video games specifically, and that's why I said how is this important and relevant to video games, is video games are such a bigger budget than writing a book. Movies are big too.
They really count on sales.
They do.
They really count on sales. People
and then
buy
hooking you for a long term.
Yeah, so they have to be. So they really, it is a design consideration.
They're
that if you're doing, yeah, exactly. If you're going to make one, you're not going to alienate your.
Exactly.
You're going to try not to alienate potentially new players by having all this. Like, you have to know what's going on.
Mm-hmm. So most modern games, and I say modern in quotes, thinking of like the late 90s to now, it's like modern games, every entry is succinct and tight from beginning to end within itself.
Yeah, it's meant to be like...
Not talking about games as a service.
You can understand it as much as possible without.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, even games as a service, they try to... Like World of Warcraft, for example, they tried to, like... You know what? Like, you may have missed the last expansion, but that's okay. Like,
they hit reset buttons
a
lot.
Yeah, exactly. You're not gonna necessarily. You'll miss out. There are things you'll miss out on, but you'll be able to like follow the narrative.
It's crazy to think about Destiny 1 versus Destiny 2. If you fire up Destiny 1 right now, where are you gonna be? Is that really the end game? Like, all the content for Destiny 1's over? That's actually a real question. I don't know. Like, if you log into Destiny 1, would you just get? Would you see everything that it was based on the last content drop?
I guess
never changed.
But I'm assuming that you at least the leveling up experience would be playing through the main story missions
Sure, and then you have the add-on content.
Start A, yeah.
So you'd be able to complete all of
But you may not be able to
Destiny
get
1.
you theoretically, when you get to max level, you'd theoretically be able to jump ahead story-wise to whatever the last content was. You wouldn't necessarily experience it in chronological order. That's one of the big problems.
Because games as a services change iteratively, and they
So
overwrite each other.
We're already talking about the next question, which is,
yeah?
so let's lean in, let's go ahead and like state it, which is, what are some of the pitfalls? What are some of the difficulties of long-term storytelling, but specifically as they relate to video games? Like, what are some of these things? And I would say, I've got it first on my list. This is perfect. Overcomplication of elements.
Yeah.
And since I brought up World of Warcraft, because we can't go a podcast without bringing up either World of Warcraft or Breath of the Wild, and I guarantee you both will come up, but World of Warcraft is a great example of this. It's like, it just gets so overcomplicated. Like, to the point where there are characters that are introduced that are super important during their, quote, expansion, but then are completely forgotten about 2 expansions down the road, 1 expansion down the road. Like, next expansion, cool, the character means nothing to what's going on here, because they have to try to hit all these other characters that they have and try to utilize them, but there's too many characters to do everything with, even though it would make so much more sense if this character reacted, you know, like if you're thinking about breaking it down in terms of a novel, you'd be like, oh, well, this character has to do stuff, or would normally react this way if they were presented with these circumstances in a fully fleshed out world. So, like, they just miss things. So, and then similarly, World of Warcraft has the problem where they're like, oh, we revamped the entire world in Cataclysm and made all the old leveling zones more streamlined with more quests and changes to the world.
But it was a world event that happened that changed everything.
Exactly.
You can never go back and see
characters,
the original.
Yeah, and the characters and all the narrative elements of the game refer to those things happening.
Right.
But they'll even refer to things that happen in expansions prior to what you have played if you're leveling a new character. So a new player enters World of Warcraft. They start as a human in the starting zone, Elwyn Forest. There's orcs attacking and orcs burning stuff down, and the characters are referencing things like, oh, the orcs were driven away by the Cataclysm, blah, blah, blah. And so you're like, oh, Cataclysm, blah, 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 blah. And then characters will mention things about, oh, we went through the Dark Portal, or oh, we went through the Lich King, blah, blah, blah. All this stuff that happened in those expansions. Then you get to level 60 and you're like, oh, well, now I've got to go to Outland. And the characters refer to, there are characters that were dead by the time Cataclysm came around, but they're alive now because it's Burning Crusade.
Completely.
So the narrative is completely lost. There's no way to level through World of Warcraft and get the story from start to finish right now.
Really?
In retail World of Warcraft,
that is a major pitfall of long-term storytelling.
Of having the fact that they've been telling this game story since 2004, and they've made gameplay changes to the world that have resulted in a fractured story that a new player, like, new players, if you're interested in World of Warcraft, just know you're not going to get a coherent story until you catch up to the main.
All right, so if you buy
stuff.
Heroes of Azeroth now, I'm going to highlight another pitfall that I'm talking about, and I already alluded to it earlier. If you buy Heroes of Azeroth?
Battle for Azeroth? Yeah.
Battle for Azeroth right now, and you get that level 100 boost when you create a new character. So I'm going to create a new character. I'm level 100. What's going to happen? Am I going to go to a new area?
You're going to go straight to, if you know nothing about World of Warcraft.
Yeah.
If the last Warcraft game you played was Warcraft 3, yeah, you're going to go right into Koltyris or
so that
Zandalar.
area, from level 100 to what's the max level? 20? 120?
120, yeah.
Would I level from level 100 to 120
it would be 110 to 120,
and have a succinct story?
You would have a self-contained story.
Exactly. So that is a pitfall that I'm going to, is that every new entry of video games, because they're so expensive, they want as many people as possible to buy them and feel like they're getting a full, complete experience, has to iterate instead of like, they can't plan ahead. Say, I'm going to create a quadrilogy of games starting now, and I'm going to promise all of my fans that I'm going to have 4 games out.
Yeah.
You don't know if the first game's going to sell at all. You have no clue if what you have is going to be worth 4 games. You know, it comes out and it flops. Where's the other 3 games? But you've truncated your story. You've gimped yourself because you wanted to make this quadrilogy, but you didn't plan ahead. So all of that to say is every game that comes out now has this distinct storytelling mode because of the aspect of the video game industry, just how it is. Like, it's expensive to make games. It's a huge commitment. It's a very high risk.
And also, you're not guaranteed to get, so you can't sit there and be like, I'm going to tell a story in 3 parts. This entry is going to hit this beat. This entry is going to hit this beat. This entry is going to hit. You can try to plan that out and hope that you get to tell those story beats, but you may not get to. And as a storyteller, like as a writer of that game, working with your team, you have to kind of accept that. And you're going to get pressure from up top saying you have to try to tell as best the story you can in this one entry and make it compelling for people who are going to play this entry. And then you have to write the next one in such a way that it's not going to confuse new players who get hyped and excited about the next entry.
Right.
So you really, like, it really does, yeah, I can see what you're saying. It really hampers down. I do think it ties into mine where it's like, the more entries you put in like that, the more overcomplicated you get because you're trying to introduce new characters while also, like, trying to tie in old characters, but then you don't want to tie in too many old characters because people might not recognize them and then they'll be confused. I don't know who that is. And I'm a new player and I'm alienated by that. Yeah, it can get really complicated really fast. The next thing that I think is huge in regards to like a pitfall for long-term storytelling is this idea of one-upmanship or escalation. You see this a lot in TV seasons, which is like, well, cool, we pulled out all the stops last season. Now we've got to do it again. Now we got to do it again, but bigger. So the story begins to take on these absurd elements, and the characters begin to act in ways that are more like caricatures than actual, like, three-dimensional characters. So they become more one-dimensional and less three-dimensional because because you just have to keep getting bigger and bigger with it. Like, oh, this was popular. This character acting like a jerk was popular last season, so we're going to just lean into that and make him a jerk because that's popular. But it reduces that character.
Right.
It reduces what makes them interesting. And then similarly, it's not just a character phenomenon, it's a plot phenomenon too. Like, oh, last time we blew up the moon. So this time we have to, like, create a black hole that's, like, flying through the solar system, and the heroes have to stop that. You know what I mean? Like, they have to keep getting crazier and ridiculous and bigger and bigger. And it's funny too, because I started off with blowing up the moon, and I'm like, wait, how do I get bigger than blowing up the moon? That's exactly the problem that long-term storytellers face when they feel like they have to keep topping what they did last entry. And this happens in video games all the time.
So what game franchises do that? That come to your mind right now?
I feel like the Call of Duty franchises probably do that, but I don't know for sure.
They don't really. Call of Duty doesn't really escalate. They just highlight different eras of time, and then they got crazy with, like, the future sci-fi side that doesn't exist, so they can kind of do it. That gave them the freedom that they wanted to do what they wanted. And so, like, at first it was like, this is modern warfare, or this is World War II, and this is modern warfare, and then we're gonna go to Vietnam, and then we're gonna go to the Cold War, and I don't know. So they just bounce all around, and they end up in the future sci-fi, and then they're going to come back to Modern Warfare again. They kind of run out of content.
I feel like,
that's not an example of the escalation and the craziness that you're talking about.
You gave me time to think about an example. An example that, even though I think this is a great game franchise, and I do genuinely like its story, I can see where the next entry in the franchise might be in trouble because Diablo, they started off tight. This is just a problem with the town of Tristram. There's a demon in the town of Tristram. You go down, you kill him. It's Diablo. Then it was like, oh, but the hero is the one who then put the soul stone in his head, and now Diablo is possessing the hero, and now he goes off and threatens the world. So great, okay, cool. Diablo 2, we take on the threat to the world. The world of Sanctuary is in danger. We go kill Diablo again, because this time he's threatening the world.
Right.
Great. Diablo 3 comes 20 years later or whatever, literally. And now Diablo is attacking heaven itself. We have to go defend heaven. I'm like, okay, cool. I'm with you. This is great. Cool. We're going into heaven. We're fighting corrupted angels. We're killing Diablo who's possessed someone again. Great. We're still killing Diablo, but fine. This time he's threatening heaven. Now I'm like, what the heck are you going to do next? Right. He's already threatened the world. He's already threatened heaven itself. What is Diablo going to, like, literally come out of the screen and attack me, the player? Like, where else are we going to go with this? So, like, that's, I think, that's a great example of one that's like, okay, you've done about as far as you can go. You're either going to have to dial it back in Diablo 4 or do something. I don't know what you could do. You know what I mean? Like, reboot the entire franchise, reboot the entire series. And we'll talk about the way that, franchises deal with that. But do you have any other examples come to mind?
I'm racking my brain right now. I just can't think. Maybe Borderlands? Like, the first game was just Pandora. Like, one planet, one vault. Halo. One Halo, one ring.
Yes, Halo is so bad at this.
Right, it starts off, and both games are similar trajectory. It's like, we're just going to, and even Diablo, we're going to focus on one thing. And it did really, really well. The fans want more. So Halo 2 comes out, and now we're taking
on Earth. Now it's Earth.
So Earth is there, and at the end of Halo 2, big giant cliffhanger. Was it revealed in Halo 2 that there's more than one Halo?
I think it was revealed that the Halos are weapons, specifically that they're weapons
against the flood.
They're meant to contain the flood, but if the flood gets out, they're meant to destroy all sentient life in the universe. So you have to. So all the Halo rings are threatening the entire universe now.
And,
so that's
then 3
the plot
was
of 3.
about the Arbiter and the key.
Right. So then 4, they had to be like, okay, well, what's worse than the threat of the Flood and the Halos. How about the people who built the Halos?
Right.
And then there's an evil Forerunner. So
the Forerunners, yeah.
And then I don't even know what Halo 5 was about. But yeah, that's exactly the phenomenon I'm talking about. Like, I feel like it's more prevalent in the video games than it seems. And even franchises I like BioShock is not immune to this. It's like, okay, first we're in this cool zone of Rapture, and then we're in Rapture again, but players are like, we're kind of bored of Rapture, so what are we going to do? We're going to go into the sky. Yeah. And now it's the 1920s, and now there's parallel universes and stuff
what
like
I got
that.
you. It was the parallel universes where they escalated to insanity.
Okay, where are we going to go from here? Yeah. And even though I speak highly of BioShock, like, it's not, when done well, it's not bad. But you can tell, like, the pattern we're talking about here is, like, you can just see how even good franchises are not immune to this idea of, like, we have to make it bigger. And that's a problem because it's not always within the realm of reason to get bigger. And your when you're talking about having to have entries where you're competing, in a long-term space, it really does hamper your ability to tell a good story if you feel like you have to keep one-upping the last story.
Right.
Yeah. So we spent a lot of time on that. Let's talk about some of the other ones. Poor character handling. I think I've hit on this already. Where
a little bit.
Characters become more like caricatures, over-exaggerated.
Go from three-dimensional characters. But you can go back to our episode about character and learn more about what we mean when we say three-dimensional.
Yeah, it's funny. We're going to hit on theme, plot, and characters. Yeah. So we have a whole episodes dedicated to those specific elements. Yeah.
So you have a three-dimensional character that's well-rounded, that has actually incurred some change and showed growth and maturity.
Also has multiple aspects to their personality. They're not just the swashbuckling rogue. They're not just the intellectual doctor. They could be both of those things.
Right.
And they could also be like dealing with deep insecurities at the same time. Like, that's a three-dimensional character, very fleshed out, very human. But you again, like I said, what you see happen in these long-term stories is like, oh, players or readers, whatever, really responded to that aspect of that character, so we're going to blow that up out of the water.
And make them that person.
And make them that.
Define them by that.
Exactly, as opposed to what made them interesting was their complexity in the first place. Yeah, that happens all the time. I think that loss of focus, I kind of hit on that.
We're just really the highlight of that.
Yeah, a loss of focus. I mean, even Zelda, I would say, where they're like, we want to just do something different. Like, they clearly want Zelda to be... Like, they clearly want Zelda to kind of be like Final Fantasy, where each story is its own self-contained story, but yet they feel the need to make sure they're all connected.
In some way.
In a way that's and so they've made this timeline that's super confusing and super weird. We'll get there, yeah. And then, stretching the narrative beyond what makes sense, I think, is the last pitfall that I can think of, where it's just like, I have a better TV example for this, but, like, the best shows, I think, are the ones that have a plan, beginning, middle, end. We're going to go 5 seasons and then tell the story in 5 seasons.
Right.
The worst shows are the ones that are like, well, this was successful. Let's keep telling this until people are sick of it. And the best example I have is the show Supernatural.
Don't know anything about it.
This show, it's a CW show, totally just a show that's an excuse for hot people to interact with other hot people. It's a great show. Sounds though. Like Arrow. It's the same CW. They did the Arrow as well. But it was a really good show, and the show was planned for 5 seasons, and their original plan for the ending of the 5 seasons, like, it's basically 2 brothers that hunt demons, basically, is the structure. Well, at the end of the 5th season, the original plan was to have one was going to be possessed by Lucifer, and the other was going to be possessed by Michael, and they were both going to end up in basically hell, like in a pit, trapped there for all of eternity, fighting for all of eternity. The whole beauty of that story arc was that they were going to lay the trap before they were possessed. They laid out the trap, and then they got possessed, and then they ended up in the pit together, and that was the end of the show. Both brothers would have been trapped in eternity.
Right.
Like, and that would have been a tragic but beautiful kind of like culmination of all the elements they built for the 5 seasons. Instead, they were like, oh, they got the pressure from the network. They're like, we have to keep this going. So they planned a 6th season out, and so instead of both brothers ending up in the pit, they introduced like a 3rd brother who was like a step brother.
Oh dear.
And then the step brother got possessed by Michael, and the other brother, the one brother, still got possessed by Lucifer, and those 2 ended up in the pit, but the original oldest brother was saved and out. And so then they had this whole plot where the other brother from hell came back but didn't have a soul, and then they kept the show going for 10 more seasons, and they're on season 15 now, and they've kept escalating, but like they just lost focus. Like the story's not tight, it's not controlled, it's not a narrative anymore. It's really just, what can we put the Winchester brothers through next?
Yep.
Yeah, and I feel like that kind of stuff happens in video games all the time. World of Warcraft is a great example.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
I
wonder if a lot of MMOs fall into that trap, or games as a service. I think those types of games lean into those pitfalls more.
Yeah.
Like, they're just more susceptible to it.
There's tons of entries that probably start from the same thing. But we've talked a lot about the pitfalls. Let's talk about some franchises that we think have overcome those pitfalls. Franchises that we think have handled stories. We'll say handled stories well, poorly, or weirdly, or just good, bad, weird.
Yeah, good, bad, weird.
So good, bad, weird.
I have a couple of examples of good.
Good. Yeah, let's start with good.
Yeah,
what are some
good is good.
ones? Yeah.
So Final Fantasy.
Okay.
We joke that there's like 1 million of them. But every single one, except for the ones that are actually touted as sequels, which are 10 and 13, they all have their own world. This is genius, because the problem I talked about earlier, video games are risky and extremely expensive. You don't know ahead of time how many you're going to produce. The first Final Fantasy is a known story that Sakaguchi and his team over at Squaresoft, where this was the last chance that they had to be successful at a game. They had come out with a couple of flops. They were hemorrhaging money, and they were like on a shoestring budget, and they were like, this is our last shot. If this game doesn't happen, we're done, and we're going to shut this whole project down. Final Fantasy, right? Hey, well, it worked well. They did not expect it to be as a successful game as it was, given that Dragon Warrior was eating his lunch back in the day. Then they came out with Final Fantasy 2. Okay, whoa, this is awesome. What did we learn from 1? Let's start over. We don't know if we're going to get a 3.
Right.
So we're going to go ahead and not tie it to 1, and we're not going to tie it, we're not going to leave it open-ended, hoping there's another one coming, right? So then that just kind of kept going. And now there's 15 of them, and the main core games are all different. They're all their own worlds. They have tropes, though, that kind of like allude to each other. Chocobos, cactars. We talked about this in our Final Fantasy episode that you can go back and listen to. So I think that's a good way to tackle... Like, you want to string a franchise together, but you don't want to tell a single story over all of them.
It does. It is a choice.
But you have themes and plot themes
I would say
are mirrored in each of them.
Yeah. I would say it is a safe choice.
Yeah.
So it's a good choice ultimately if you're trying to accomplish if you're trying to avoid the basic pitfalls we're talking about, it is a safe choice. I wouldn't necessarily say it's a good choice, only because I guess the franchise doesn't suffer as a whole, but like, I kind of wish it was more of like, I think I messaged you about this on Marco Polo and you never responded, but you know, I think of Brandon Sanderson's Cosmere and how he's like, in the same way of Final Fantasy, each novel series in his Cosmere, it's its own self-contained story. You can read it and never pick up on the hints that these worlds are connected, but the worlds are connected. And it's not just like, oh, all the worlds have chocobos in them. It is like, it would be something along the lines of like, chocobos are the key to the reason why these are all. And so that's what I would love. If someone were to ever come in and say, I'm going to make sense of the Final Fantasy lore, I would want it to be something like that, where like, it's either multiple planets or some kind of multiverse situation where these worlds...
But I feel like you could do that with any story, any franchise.
Well,
you could have someone come in and be like, connect all of these.
Yeah, you could, but that's why I guess what I'm arguing then is like...
Star Fox and Mario, they're the same universe, make it happen. You're like, okay.
Yeah, then therefore, I wish someone had done that like Brandon Sanderson did from the start, which is, I'm going to make this all one world from the start. So Sanderson cited Isaac Asimov as his inspiration for the Cosmere, because Asimov came in and said, I'm going to write, I have all these stories, and he came in later and tied them together. Sanderson was like, I love that idea, but I want to do it from the beginning because it's clear that Asimov did this later because there's plot holes. Yeah. So I like that idea of like, I kind of wish they had said, well, we're going to tie Final Fantasy 1 and 2 together. We're going to make them basically different planets in the same world, but we're going to only leave hints at that. And then kept that going. So that would be my only criticism of Final Fantasy. But you're right. It does sort of serve as a basic. I would say my first good example that I wrote down was, I actually wrote down Borderlands. And I do think it's a good example. So even though, like we said, the escalation of like from Pandora to like multiple planets, I still think the idea where Borderlands does really well with carrying on its narrative is they get to both have their cake and eat it too, in the sense that they don't feel beholden to keep the same characters. When Borderlands 2 came around, they could have very well said, well, you're going to play as Lilith, Brick, Mordecai, and Roland again. Instead, they were like, you know what, we're going to give you new Vault Hunters, but we still love these characters, so we're going to make those characters... NPCs, part of the narrative, part of the story, so that you still get a relationship with those characters. And then they continue the tradition with Borderlands 3. The characters that you played in Borderlands 2, Maya, Zero, at least Maya and Zero for now, are going to be NPCs in Borderlands 3, and presumably they'll bring in Axton, Salvador, Gage, and Krieg at some point.
We know Lilith
as well.
will be there.
Yeah, and the same ones from Borderlands 1.
And Mordecai.
So what you see over a long term is you still get to like feel connected to these characters. So they really do it by a character thing. And I do think that like it's a logical step now to say, okay, cool. Like we've been on Pandora for 3 games pretty much. Pandora's Moon for one of them, but still really focused around Pandora. So they're like, we're going to introduce a bunch of new planets and like move on to those new planets, which I think
this is the first escalation.
Yeah, it is. It is
a real one.
It is an escalation, but as opposed to other franchises, I think that they can land in this planet hopping thing, and they could do Borderlands 4, 5, 6, continuing with just introducing new planets without having to escalate it. Just continuing with this idea of like, well, with a new planet,
new galaxies, new universes.
They don't have to do that. Exactly. They don't have to do new galaxies, universes. They can sit here and say, well, we've landed in this cool planet hopping thing. Let's stick with that.
Let's go in the upside down.
Or, exactly.
Go into the vault.
Or they could just say, there's this one particular planet that's a big deal, so we're going to go back to a single planet, but it's going to be a big deal. You know, they could continue to stay in that realm as opposed to having to escalate. So I think it's a good, like, example of an escalation that makes sense in regards to now we can build a franchise around this idea. Yeah.
I do want to talk about another good example of this is Metroid.
Yeah.
Every entry in Metroid is succinct in its own, but they have great ways of picking up where the last one left off and having some sort of narrative between the 2 games or 3. Like now there's Metroid 1, 2, 3 is Super Metroid. And then there's the Metroid Prime series, and they're all connected. Metroid Zero Mission, which is a remake of the first one, and then Metroid Fusion for Game Boy Advance. I think it's the latest one in the series as far as chronology goes. And it's really cool to see how they've like, they don't know what the next Metroid's going to be, but they still have a good way of like picking up where the last one left off. Yeah. Even if it's not in chronological order. They didn't release in chronological order, so they're kind of like fitting prequels in with sequels and stuff, and they just do a really good job of bookending the front and end with connections to wherever they want it to fit in the timeline, and then allowing the game to play out a narrative within and not negating how Samus would react to certain things. So like just because they throw in a game between, so say they come out with Metroid Prime 4 and it takes place after 1 but before 2, like they're not going to negate, I have confidence that they wouldn't negate how Samus would react in Metroid Prime 2 versus 1, or even in the other M where she had dialogue. Like, they were consistent in keeping her where she should be, how she should react, maintaining her depth. It's great. So I think Metroid is a great example of a franchise that continues to build a narrative as it happens. Kind of like building the bridge as you cross the chasm kind of thing. I just want to highlight that.
No, that's good. I
like
haven't
Metroid.
played enough Metroid, but I get the sense. I get the vibe that Samus is her own character in all of her ventures.
Yeah.
Like, are
and
still
grows.
meaningful and important. Yeah. I bring it up. It's another one that we bring up often in the podcast, but I have to bring it up because it's so good and relevant in this regard. And it's God of War, and God of War hits on a pitfall that I forgot to mention, which is a franchise can really land on like a good vibe. Like this is the vibe of our franchise. But in some cases, as we see with God of War, as its audience gets older, its style no longer hits the same way. And God of War, I'll hit on like this hyper-violent, super one-dimensional revenge machine character.
Right.
Kind of got stale by the third entry.
Which resonated with teenagers in the early odds.
Right. When God of War first came out, I was like, yeah, edgy. Let's kill some, like, let's boobs buck up against authority. It was really more the like, let's buck up against authority. Let's give them hell, to those who would seek to oppress us. And then they did that for 2 more entries in the franchise. And by the time the third one came around, many of those teenagers had kind of grown up and been like, this is just not hitting the same way.
Kratos is kind of stupid.
He's kind of a jerk.
Misogynistic.
Like, he's kind of a jerk.
Yeah.
And so God of War, so again, you may think, why'd you put this in the good category? Well, it was all saved by God of War 4. They gave it some time. They gave it some time to marinate and be like, all right, now we're going to introduce a more mature Kratos. So the reinvention without a complete reboot. They didn't say, okay, well, this is a new Kratos. They just said, you know what?
Kratos grew up too.
Yeah, he grew up too. He kind of realized how much of a jerk he was and has kind of tried to like distance himself from that, but is super scarred and messed up from it. So it told this like, so they kind of, it almost makes me want to go back and replay how good of a story 4 was, makes me want to go back and replay 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah.
To like kind of let that sort of soak in and make it more meaningful.
I have them all now.
Yeah, it's nice.
1, 2 on PS2 and 3 on PS3.
3 and 4.
Yeah.
Yep. Oh, you have on PS3. Yep. So yeah, that's kind of I think that's a good example of a franchise that saved itself through good practices of long-term storytelling. So I'm going to use that as a jumping way. I'm going to skip the other ones because I had mentioned Uncharted and BioShock is good.
Yes.
We've already talked about bad, which was, well, we've already talked about how World of Warcraft's messed up their franchise. Do you have any other bad examples that come to mind? Okay, that's fine. Yeah. I want to talk about a weird one real quick, and that is the way the Zelda's handled it.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
And I kind of hit on this, alluded to it. Zelda was like, again, we want to tell self-contained stories. It was clear they wanted to tell self-contained stories, but they loved their characters of Zelda, Link, and Ganon so much that they felt like that they needed to include them in every single entry of the franchise, with a few notable exceptions.
I feel like Zelda is a story about Hyrule more than it is each of the iterations of Link and Ganon.
Yeah,
and
but they
used it in a way like
there's
3 different timelines for one that are all branched off of Ocarina of Time.
Ocarina of Time, yep.
And I feel like when I talked earlier about how you can hire anyone to link any two no pun intended, to link any 2 stories together. You can hire an expert writer to tie Star Fox and Mario together. You could do that.
Sure.
And they could come out with a book and an official canon of how those 2 worlds link together, and it would be okay. Like, it would work, because someone's smart enough to do that. You can take all of the aspects of the story and kind of marry them. I feel like with Zelda, there was, here's a game, here's a sequel to that game, here's a third one to that game, and then here's the 4th one that has nothing to do with it, but we need to tie it together somehow. So there's 3 different timelines that each consist of different types of games. Wind Waker was another, new, completely different direction than Zelda, but you had to tie it to something. Oh, this is tied back to the one possible outcome of Ocarina of Time. And then the It sequels came out. And then you had Majora's Mask, which was a direct sequel to Ocarina of Time.
Right. I feel like they did all that in hindsight, though, as opposed to when they were actually writing the game, they were just like, oh, cool, we're going to make this a loose sequel.
Right.
Loose sequel. Like, we're going to do what we want, but we still want it to be Link. And so when you said it's a story about Hyrule, I would agree if and only if the story had been different characters in Hyrule each time. You know what I mean? Like, if the story was truly about Hyrule, then it would have been one game you're playing as Link, one game you're playing as Derogio. You know what I mean? Just new characters. Right? Exactly.
But the idea is that Link is reincarnated, and Zelda's reincarnated, Ganon's reincarnated, so because they're the Triforce.
Exactly.
Right?
They've had to make that happen.
So the tertiary characters are the ones that are all new. We're introduced to Gorons in Ocarina of Time. We're introduced to the Gerudo race, the Zoras, and they're all different characters. Like Princess Ruto isn't in Breath of the Wild. Right? So each of the other tertiary characters aren't there, but the 3 that are centered around the Triforce, the story is the Triforce and Hyrule. I should have clarified the 2 together, and it's reincarnations of Link. So you have this is why it's weird. This is why it's under the category of weird, because you have a good example of Zelda where the timeline makes sense if you look at it from the perspective of Triforce and Hyrule. Doesn't really make sense when you start thinking about
breaking down the individual games,
and
with how the
3 different timelines, and you're like, wait, this outcome, and the most controversial one is when Link dies in Ocarina of Time.
Yeah,
we,
because it
as
didn't
the
happen.
gamers, see a game over screen, and we redo it until he does win.
Right.
We never
never experience it. Yeah. If you were to say that's gameplay logic, then what would happen is you would create multiple, not just 3. You'd have a different universe for every time Link died under a different circumstance.
Right. And that would be infinite.
And it would be exactly. Right. So you can't do that. So they had to make up a 3rd timeline.
And I think that's the part that was shoehorned in after the fact.
Yeah, that one was annoying. And then also they implied that Breath of the Wild was going to be in, before the game came out, they implied they're like, you'll know where it is in the timeline. Mm-hmm. Then the game came out, people played through it, and we still don't know where this is in the timeline. Yeah. And it's we intentionally kept it vague. Okay, I thought you said we were going to know for sure where it was in the timeline. Yeah. No, we always planned for it to be vague. And then later they're like, we like to think of Breath of the Wild as a culmination of all the timelines, as in it's the ultimate, it's where all the timelines would have ended up, and therefore it's a merging of the timelines. Yep. So effectively, going forward, all the games should be back on one timeline now. Yeah. Again, weird. I say it's weird not because it's necessarily bad, though there are bad elements. Mm-hmm. Not because it's necessarily good either, because there are good elements.
Right.
It's just weird. It's just why did you choose to do this when you could have just made it perfectly...
Yeah.
It's
like they married the ideas that we talked about with the linear games that are sequential, and that's like Halo, Borderlands, BioShock, Uncharted, God of War, very linear games. Yeah. Each one is just, on each other. They took ideas from that and married it with Final Fantasy, where we just have a new game with new stuff,
new
that's
independent,
kind of tropey to the old stuff. And then they took those 2 ideas and married them together.
But they're instead of chocobos and certain magic spells that are consistent across all the games, it's literally the main characters are consistent. Link. It's what? So yeah, it's definitely weird. And I can't say it's successful, but I can say it is certainly,
It is successful now.
I mean, it's successful in the sense that it sells.
Yeah.
But is it successful as a storytelling device?
I'm enthralled. I love it. It's my favorite franchise of all time.
I don't know. I don't know if it's my favorite franchise because of the story, though. You know what I mean? Yeah. So, anyways, it's a weird one. So, I do want to talk about. Okay, well, I'm going to skip the next one and just talk about what are tools that what are some of those tools, and we've hit on a few of them. But what are tools that video game storytellers use to try to keep the narrative up over time? It's not just video game storytellers; TV and movies do it too. But what are some of the tools they use? And I'll say the first one is obvious. Episodic plot structure. We talked about
the linear nature of that.
Yeah, we talked about this in our plot episode where we talked about different plot structures. Episodic is just here's entry 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Yep.
And they're episodes, they're self-contained stories. Is literally what we've been talking about most of the podcast is just like each story tells its own story, but they're connected by an overarching plot.
Yep.
So it's the same characters, just here's their adventure this time. Here's their adventure this time. This time their adventures on water. This time their adventures in the sky. This time their adventures underground.
Yeah.
So that's a storytelling tool where they try to, again, where it gets dangerous is where they have to escalate it. Like, this story's in the sky. This one's in space. This one's
across the universe.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
The multiverse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's where the danger lies. But the basic episode of format still works, and when done correctly, can be interesting.
Yeah. The next one is world building, which is super important.
So important. I wrote in parentheses, super important. Yeah. If you're going to tell a long-term story franchise, if you're going to tell a story over the years and try to make each individual entry approachable for newcomers, you have to flesh out a world. Flesh out a world where that way, if you wanted to tell this character's story over here in this city on this continent of the world, you have to have a fleshed out world to work in.
Yep.
But when done well, you can see, you might be able to already pick up on how, like, that's how you do it. Like, that's it.
It makes sense.
And you can do whatever you want. You can say, okay, well, you've got a fleshed out world. You've got all these elements where you hint to them in the first game, and then you earn exploring them in the next game.
Yeah.
So that's where, that's where world building comes in. And I haven't really seen a game do this well.
Metroid does that.
I guess if I were to say early Warcraft did it pretty well. Like Warcraft 3 was a world building masterpiece.
Yeah.
Because it created all these, like, here's 2 continents. And there's a 3rd continent up there too, where mysterious stuff happens.
Northrend.
Yeah, Northrend, exactly.
Yeah.
And oh, by the way, there's also another planet that's connected through the Dark Portal where the orcs came from. Seems a little escalated, but they've built that from the beginning. You know what I mean? So it's like, there's like another world, and then there's 2 continents, and there's a main world, and there's all this stuff that happened 10,000 years ago. So they built all these different elements, and then they built enough. I would say Warcraft 3, they did enough world building in Warcraft 3 that they've been able to sustain World of Warcraft on Warcraft 3 plot threads alone.
Yeah.
For,
perfect.
Yeah. So, like, all that crazy stuff that I talked about with World of Warcraft and the overcomplication of the narrative, at the same time, every one of those things was connected to something that was built in Warcraft 3. So, the Lich King, Illidan and Outland, Deathwing, Pandaria, and even the Legion's return, and even Kultyrus and Zandalar, and the Old Gods, all of that was laid, the foundations of that was laid in Warcraft 3. So, like, good world building, despite the fact that World of Warcraft kind of took it to weird places.
Right. Yeah, I think the Elder Scrolls games do that well.
Yes.
Although I'm not as well versed in it. But Elder Scrolls 3, Morrowind, 4 was Oblivion, 5 is Skyrim, which I'm playing now. They all take place in the world of Tamriel, and they're all in different areas of the world,
and they all mention
allude to each other.
Exactly. They're like, oh, this kind of crazy thing happened elsewhere. Right. And then you're like, ooh, what's elsewhere? It's like, oh, it's a land full of dragons. I want to go to elsewhere. And so there's a point at which the games are going to take it elsewhere. Yeah.
And Fallout, the nuclear Fallout happens, and then Fallout 3 is in DC, Fallout 4 is in Boston, Fallout 76 is in West Virginia, Fallout New Vegas is in Vegas. And so it's all kind of in the same time frame. Kind of. I mean, 76 is the origin, like the first people out. But after that was societies have been established, and they all reference other towns into each, like, oh, did you hear about what happened in Boston? Or did you hear about what happened in DC? Like, they all reference that. So I think Fallout 76, being a prequel to all of them, used elements of those games to, like, come up with an origin story of, like, oh, these are the first people to come out of the vaults when the stuff went bad after the nuclear blast.
It's a great example of prequels and sequels, which are a tool that storytellers will use. I think Pre-Sequel was a great example of this.
Mm-hmm.
It's a Borderlands game that one could argue is really just an advanced DLC of Borderlands 2 because it uses the same engine, but it's its own fully fleshed out story, but it takes place before Borderlands 2.
The content of the story.
The content of the story takes place before Borderlands 2.
It's actually a narrative that happens after 2.
It is, yeah. They use a framing device that happens after 2. The storytelling is great, though, and whenever people ask, well, should I play Pre-Sequel first because the events take place before 2? Absolutely not. You will understand Pre-Sequel better and the things they allude to if you play it after 2 because they specifically allude to things that happen in 2, or prelude to things that happened in 2. Tales for the Borderlands does this really well, too. I've been playing it as well. For being a completely different game, it's like, oh, you're clearly meant to play this after Pre-Sequel. Like, it's because there's stuff, even though there's stuff that happens before Athena gets captured in the framing device. Yeah, so it's like, it's very, yeah, so I think Borderlands has been able to pull that off because they've employed the idea of sequels and prequels, and they've sort of played with the timeline in a way that, like, each game still has content that is rewarding. It still tells its own narrative. Like when you're playing Tales for the Borderlands, you're like, oh, I'm following this character's story, but it alludes to things that happen in the other games that rewards people who have been paying attention to the story for a long time. We will love that.
Yeah.
So, like, if someone were to be like, I'm going to pick up Tales for the Borderlands, I'd be like, great, enjoy it, have fun. You're going to like the story. And then also, you may want to go back and play Borderlands 2 because you might want to know how Nakayama built AI of Jack in the first place, because that's all explored in Pre-Sequel and Borderlands 2. So it makes sense. Like, they employ this. It's a tool they use to kind of tell storytelling over time. So the whole a good prequel is never meant to be viewed before its original.
I was just about to sidetrack you. Let's get off the rails and say, across all mediums, would you suggest consuming a content in the order in which they were released? Or, once you know, in hindsight, the chronological order, would you consume them all in chronological order?
I think it's a preference based on what you're seeking in the moment. I think if you're looking for like a world-building experience, I would say view them all in the chronological order. But if you're looking for the actual, like, if you want the story to have the biggest impact for a single narrative, each entry, I would say do them in the order they're released. The best example of this I have from a non-video game example is the Chronicles of Narnia.
Oh, really?
Everyone says start with Magician's Nephew. No, never, ever. Start with Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, because it was the first one that was written and published. The Magician's Nephew is more interesting and makes sense if you've read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, because the things that happen are explicitly tied to the events of the original. Yeah. Star Wars is the same way.
Yep, I was about to use Star Wars as my example.
You're not going to understand the significance of Darth Vader if you haven't seen Darth Vader devoid from his backstory.
Right.
Like, because Darth Vader is a figure that only works if he is this mysterious, evil space wizard samurai.
Right, yeah.
And then when you learn his backstory in the prequels, it works better. Doesn't work great in that case, but works better than if you were just say, I'm going to start with episode 1. I would never start my son on episode 1. Yep. I would start with episode 4.
We just had this discussion about my 4-year-old. Yeah. Because episode 1 is more geared towards kids with Jar Jar. Alex, my wife, was like, he would probably actually relate to episode 1 more. I was like, nope.
Never.
Nope.
Never.
We're not doing this. Yeah, he will start with episode 4 like the rest of us.
He will idolize Luke like the rest of us did.
Yeah. And I don't know, I always agree that you should always consume content for the first time in the order in which it was released.
I would agree
for that reason. I think if you want to be new to no one had ever played Borderlands and they wanted to experience the story, I would never suggest like 1 Pre-Sequel, Tales, 2, 3. Like never. Play them in the order they were released.
Yeah.
1, 2, Pre-Sequel, Tales, 3.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I was like, let me see if you got that right. Yeah, you did get that
right. I'm pretty confident.
If you really want to get into it, you'd say 1, 2, then all the DLC for 2 except for the Commander Lilith DLC. Yeah. Then you do Pre-Sequel, you do Tales for the Borderlands, and then you do the Commander Lilith DLC.
Yeah, that's the last caveat. It was only because of the new DLC that was released at E3.
Yeah, Borderlands Story has been told chronologically, though, which is interesting. Like, chronologically in regards to, it hasn't, like, the story itself isn't chronological, but everything is consistent with what's happened before it.
Yeah.
As they released it, which is great. I think that's smart. So
it's good.
Anyways, last question. Last question. We're just gonna say, what should video game writers start doing in order to keep their franchises fresh and interesting going forward? Do you think, if you were to give advice to someone who is like, I've been funded, whatever. Yeah, I've been hired to write the story for a new video game franchise, and they're hoping to carry it on for the next few years. What advice would you give them?
It's a combination of what we've been talking about all night, and people are already doing it. There's no new idea to bring to the table. No one's been doing this wrong. There are incorrect ways to do this, and there are more correct ways of doing it, but there's no like golden set. Depends on what you want to do, depends on what your company is, depending on how much funding you are. Are you Guerrilla Games, which is a first-party Sony company that made all the Killzone games, and now they've made Horizon Zero Dawn? I'm sure Guerrilla's like, hey, we have this passion and this vision to make something new. Sony's like, here you go, take the money, do what you want. You did amazing with Killzone 1, 2, and 3. Just keep it going. Like, go do something, you do you. And they're like, well, this game could be so good that it could be a franchise. We want to keep open-minded, but we also want to keep a game succinct. So they did that. And I think it is perfect in that they have Horizon Zero Dawn 1. Complete, full-blown story, but world-builded enough to where they could come up with a sequel that could focus on the time before the dinosaurs. It could be a direct sequel with Aloy's continuing plot, what's going to happen. If you saw the end credits, there's some stuff that happened. You can see that. I don't want to spoil it. But so I think the advice is to make each entry, like, plan ahead for the possibility by world building, highlighting the world building. That's why we said it was super important, right? Yep. Build a world in your first game that you have enough jumping off points, whether they be prequels or sequels or spin-offs, however you want to do it, so that if it is successful in that event, you don't know the future, then you can have tons of content
and
at your leisure.
Leave nuggets, leave little pearls where people are like, oh, I pulled a book off this bookshelf, and this bookshelf talked about another planet and the magic they discovered on this other planet. Like, all you have to do is that. And then players will speculate. And if your game's unsuccessful, at least your fans will like live in that world of speculation and think you're a genius.
Yep.
And if you are successful enough to get a new entry in the franchise, boom, that's your launching off point. That's your next story.
You don't want to create a cliffhanger ending that you don't have a second game because it didn't do well. So then you leave everyone unsatisfied. And you don't want to close off all of your possibilities so well that you have a completely closed off story, so that when a sequel does come out, you're shoehorning some sequel in that doesn't really make sense. You don't want to fall into those pitfalls either. Yeah,
you see, I'm going to disagree. I'm going to say I feel like more storytellers, more writers should take risks. And because that's what storytelling has been. If, art over the last several years has evolved because artists have been willing to take risks. Artists have been willing to say, you know what, this might fail. Nobody might like this, but here it is. I'm going to put it out there.
Yeah.
Video games tend to be, scared to do that because of those business elements, and I completely understand. I'm not saying it's not something to worry about. What I'm saying is, it is worth taking a risk and doing something crazy with the story, like a cliffhanger, with the hope that you'll hook enough people with your quality storytelling to get another entry. You know what I mean? Like, that's another tool to say, you know what? Like, yep, I left the character there. You want to find out what happens? Tell your friends to buy the freaking game. You know what I mean? Like that's been something that's been happening in storytelling forever.
As an incentive to people to buy your games for a sequel.
Well, because again, cliffhangers have been known to be a satisfying way of ending a story in their own way. And you can, they've been also proven to be like, if you have a cliffhanger ending in a book, you're going to say, oh my gosh, the cliffhanger was crazy. You should totally read it because the next book's going to be awesome.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It is a method of sales, I think.
I personally hate cliffhangers. But you can quote me in saying I love epilogues. I wish every story had a long epilogue that tells me exactly what happens with the characters' lives after the events of the story.
I love a cliffhanger. I love a good cliffhanger if it's handled
them
well.
All.
Yeah. And you know what? If to me, it's like, it's the ultimate screw you. If the game's not successful, so what? You know what? I'm going to leave you hanging.
For Firefly?
Yeah. Oh.
Yeah.
So sad.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, but they get to wrap it up with Serenity.
They did.
Anyways, we are running over time here, so I do think that that's a good place to end and just sort of say, I do think I have other thoughts and what's would be my advice, but that's for another time. We'll save that for another podcast.
What does the future of storytelling look like?
Yeah,
VR.
Whatever. Yeah, VR. Totally. VR, the youth of the nation. But anyways, that is our show for the day. Tell us what your thoughts are. We want to hear from you. We want to hear what your thoughts on long-term storytelling. Is there a franchise that you're just like, oh my gosh, the story was awesome. They told it really well. We want to hear it. We want to play it. So let us know. And all things considered, we just want to hear feedback from you. If you thought this topic was lame and stupid and we shouldn't have talked about it, then we want to hear that too. We want to hear how we can improve. So, Termite, where can the good folks of the internet find us?
You guys can all go to 80bitpodsmash.com. 80 smash pod
80
80 pod
80 Podsmash
80-bit. Wow, who can spell?
80BITPODSMASH.
Wow. All right, go for it. Spelling bee. 80bitpodsmash.com is our landing site where we have links to Google Play, iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio. You can find us on any platform you would desire. If you want us to be somewhere that we are not, let us know and we'll put ourselves there. We also are on all social media that you would hopefully find us on, that would like to find us on, and that's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Reddit. We are 80BIT Podsmash, no hyphens or uppercases or funny business, just Google 80-bit Podsmash. You'll find us there. And please, we have a subreddit with many threads. You can create your own thread. You can start conversations with the community there. That's probably the most fun place to have a discussion with multiple members of the community. If you want to talk directly to us, tweet at us, or post something on our Facebook page and hit us up there.
Yeah, and we are also Twitch streaming now a little bit.
Yeah.
We still don't have a schedule hammered completely out, although we may by the time this podcast launches.
Twitch.tv/80bitpodsmash.
But by this time this airs, we both will have probably done sort of an experimental fun one. So hopefully you've checked those out. They'll probably be up on YouTube if you haven't gotten to see them live. But follow us on Twitch, and that way you'll be able to see us whenever we do go live. You'll get alerted. So cool. Next week we are going to be doing one of two final episodes of one of our long-standing series. We're going to be doing gaming by the decades, and we're going to go real back in time, and we're going to go to the 70s.
Ooh.
Video games origins. So we've done the 90s, the aughts. We're going to now rewind, do the 70s, the 80s, and then by the time the new year comes around, we'll be able to do one more, which is we'll wrap up the whole series with the 2010s. And then who knows? If we're still doing the podcast in 10 more years, we'll do a 2020s. But
we'll be in our 40s.
Oh my gosh, that'll be awesome. So yeah, that's the plan with next week. So we'll be going back to the 70s and talking about that.
All right.
That should be fun. So, all right, then that's the show. We'll see you when we talk about the 70s next week.
See you next week.